Napoleon had a nickname for the man who would one day destroy him. He called him a sepoy general. It was an insult. It meant a soldier who'd only ever won against what Napoleon saw as ragged native armies in India. A second-rater who'd never faced a real European force. The greatest military mind of the age looked across the map at the Duke of Wellington and saw an amateur. Here's the part that should stop you. The battle in India that Napoleon was sneering at, the one he used as proof that Wellington was a nobody, Wellington himself called the finest thing he ever did. Better than Spain. Better, in his own words, than beating Napoleon at Waterloo. So who was right, the Emperor or the Duke? By the end of this video, you'll have your answer, because we're going to walk through the 3 tactical moves that take Arthur Wellesley from the sepoy general nobody in Paris respected, to the one man who never lost a battle to the French, and who finally ended Napoleon for good on a muddy ridge in Belgium. And these aren't 3 lucky days. They're 3 completely different kinds of genius. One is a problem of nerve, one is a problem of timing, and one is a problem of survival against the greatest commander alive. Keep score as we go, because at the end, I want to know which one you think was the real masterpiece. Let's start in India, with the battle Napoleon mocked and Wellington treasured. In September of 1803, a 34-year-old major general named Arthur Wellesley had a problem that most commanders would call unsurvivable. He was hunting a huge army of the Maratha Confederacy across western India, and he finally found it, drawn up in a strong position near a village called Assaye. And when he counted, his stomach must have turned. His own force was around 4,500 men, plus allied cavalry. Facing him was a Maratha army that outnumbered him by something like 7-1. Tens of thousands of infantry, a vast cloud of horsemen, and here's the detail that mattered most: more than 100 cannon. And these weren't a rabble. Their infantry and their guns had been drilled and organized by European mercenary officers. They were good. The enemy had anchored their line behind a river called the Kaitna, with all those guns trained on the single known crossing point, a ford directly in front of their position. Wellesley looked at it and said plainly that to cross there would be suicide. His men would be funneled straight into the mouth of 100 guns. His guides told him there was no other way across, no other ford. And this is the first flash of the mind that would one day undo Napoleon. So watch closely, because it isn't about courage, it's about reasoning. Wellesley was scanning the ground through his spyglass, and he noticed 2 villages, one on each bank of the river, slightly downstream past the enemy's flank. And he made a deduction. 2 villages, he reasoned, facing each other across a river, wouldn't have grown up there over centuries unless the people in them had a way to get from one to the other. Villages talk to each other. Villages trade. So between those 2 villages, there had to be a crossing, whatever his guides believed. He was betting the lives of his whole army on a piece of pure logic. And he was right. There was a ford, unguarded, exactly where his reasoning said it would be. He pushed his army across it under fire, a cannon shot decapitating the man riding next to him as they crossed, and suddenly he was over the river and around the enemy's flank, in a position the Marathas had never dreamed he could reach. Now, the fight that followed was savage. It was, Wellesley later said, the bloodiest for the numbers he ever saw. 2 horses were killed under him. His Highlanders and his sepoys were torn apart by that artillery, and at one desperate moment, even the enemy gunners who had played dead rose up and turned their captured cannon back on his men. But the flank was turned, the Maratha line was rolled up, and by the end of the day that 7-1 army was in flight, leaving most of its guns behind. Here's why this counts as the first move, and why it tells you everything about the man. Anyone can be brave. Wellesley won Assaye before the first shot, inside his own head, by refusing to accept the word impossible and reasoning his way to a door nobody else could see. Decades later, an old man, the victor over Napoleon himself, he was asked to name the best thing he ever did as a soldier. He didn't say Waterloo. He didn't say Spain. He said one word: Assaye. So when Napoleon sneered sepoy general, he was pointing at the very battle its author was proudest of in his entire life. The emperor thought he was insulting an amateur. He was actually describing a man who had already, at 34, shown the exact quality that would one day kill him: patience, cold reasoning, and the nerve to bet everything on it. Quick one before the second move, and I genuinely want your take in the comments. Was Assaye brilliance, or was it a reckless gamble that just happened to pay off? Because plenty of people at the time thought Wellesley had simply been lucky. Tell me where you land. Because the next move is where he silenced the doubters completely and did the one thing everyone swore he couldn't do: attack. By 1812, Wellington, as he now was, had a reputation, and it was a strange one. Everyone agreed he was the finest defensive general in Europe, a man who could pick a piece of ground, dig in, and break any army that came at him. But that same reputation carried a sting in the tail. The French were certain he could only defend, that he didn't have the dash, the killer instinct, to attack. His opposite number in Spain, Marshal Marmont, believed it completely. And that belief is what got him destroyed. For weeks in the summer of 1812, Wellington and Marmont had shadowed each other across Spain, two armies of roughly 50,000 men each, marching in parallel, sometimes within cannon shot, each waiting for the other to slip. Wellington had actually decided to retreat. He'd sent his baggage train to the rear. Marmont, seeing the dust of those wagons in the distance, concluded exactly what Wellington's whole reputation told him to conclude: the Englishman was running. So Marmont got greedy. Eager to catch the retreating British and grab the glory for himself, he pushed his army forward hard, and in his haste, he let it stretch. His left wing went racing ahead, chasing, and a gap opened between it and the rest of his army. Now, here comes one of the great moments in the whole story, and it's almost comic. Wellington was behind a farmyard wall, eating a lunch of bread and cold roast chicken, studying the French through his spyglass with a chicken leg in his hand. He'd been waiting weeks for an opening, and he saw it. He saw Marmont's left wing march itself right out onto a limb, unsupported. He threw the chicken leg over his shoulder, leapt up, and shouted, "By God, that will do." He turned to his Spanish aide and said, "Marmont is lost." And then the defensive general who supposedly couldn't attack unleashed one of the most devastating offensive strokes of the entire Napoleonic Wars. He hurled division after division in a rolling, angled attack straight into that overextended, isolated French left wing, smashing it before the rest of Marmont's army could turn to help. And to make it worse for the French, Marmont himself was hit by an exploding shell in the opening minutes, his arm and ribs broken, and his second in command went down moments later. The French army was leaderless at the exact instant it was being torn apart. The whole decisive phase took less than an hour. A French general who survived it said Wellington had defeated an army of 40,000 men in 40 minutes. Another called it a battle fought in the style of Frederick the Great. The man they'd all dismissed as a mere defender had just proven he could annihilate you on the attack too, faster and more completely than almost anyone alive. And that's the second kind of genius. Not the reasoning of Assaye, but patience. The discipline to wait for weeks, doing nothing, absorbing the mockery, even retreating until his opponent's own arrogance handed him the single opening he needed. And then the speed to take it before it closed. If you'd have taken that gamble the second you saw the gap, drop a yes in the comments. Because most commanders wouldn't have. Most would have hesitated, double-checked, and lost the moment. Wellington had spent weeks loading the trap, so when it finally sprang, he didn't think. He moved. But Salamanca was a marshal, a very good one. The third move is a different order of problem entirely, because the third move is Napoleon. June of 1815. Napoleon is back. He had escaped his exile, reclaimed France, rebuilt his army, and now he was marching into Belgium to smash the Allied forces one by one before they could unite. For the first and only time, the Emperor and the sepoy general would face each other directly, on a low ridge near a village called Waterloo. And on paper, this was the fight Wellington should not win. Napoleon had around 72,000 men and nearly 250 guns. Wellington had roughly 68,000, many of them not British at all, but a patched-together coalition of Dutch, Belgian, and German troops of wildly varying quality, and far fewer guns. His one hope was that the Prussian army under Old Marshal Blücher, beaten a couple of days earlier, could march to his aid before Napoleon ground him down. Wellington had to survive long enough for them to arrive. That was the entire task. Survive. So how do you survive the greatest offensive commander in history when he has more men, more guns, and better troops? You use the third kind of genius, and it is the one Wellington had been perfecting his whole career. It is called the reverse slope. Here's the idea, and it's deceptively simple. Napoleon's greatest weapon was his artillery, massed cannon that could pulverize an enemy line before his infantry even advanced. So Wellington did something most generals wouldn't. He didn't line his army up on the forward face of the ridge, where Napoleon could see it and shell it. He put the crest of the ridge between his men and the French guns. He hid almost his entire army on the back slope, lying down, out of sight, out of the line of fire. For much of that long day, Napoleon's magnificent Grand Battery thundered away, and a huge amount of its fire simply screamed over the crest into empty ground or buried itself harmlessly in the rain-soaked mud. The Emperor was punching at an army he couldn't properly see. Wellington, watching his men take the punishment that did land, said with grim calm, hard pounding this, "Gentlemen, let's see who will pound longest." And when the French infantry and those magnificent waves of cavalry finally crested the ridge, expecting to find a shattered, softened-up enemy, they instead met a wall of fresh troops rising up out of nowhere, forming squares and firing point-blank into their faces. Over and over, all day, the reverse slope had turned Napoleon's single greatest strength, his guns, into wasted noise, and it kept Wellington's army alive. But make no mistake, it was desperate. This was, by Wellington's own account, the hardest fight of his life. The farmhouse of La Haye-Sainte in his center finally fell, and French guns began tearing a hole in his line at close range. His generals were being killed and wounded all around him. Trapped inside an infantry square, half blind in the smoke, Wellington said the words that capture the whole day. Night or the Prussians must come. He was hanging on by his fingernails, buying minutes. And then the Prussians came. Blücher's men smashed into Napoleon's right flank, drawing off his reserves at the critical moment. And when Napoleon made his final desperate throw, sending his legendary Imperial Guard up that same fatal ridge, they too crested it into a storm of fire from troops they never saw coming, and for the first time in living memory, the old Guard broke. The cry went up through the French army, "The Guard is retreating." And with that, it was over. Wellington won. Napoleon was finished for good. Exiled to a rock in the Atlantic he would never leave. And afterwards, the Duke didn't boast. He looked back on the closest, bloodiest day of his career and called it the nearest run thing you ever saw in your life. A damned near thing. He knew exactly how close he'd come. But he'd done the one thing no other general in Europe had managed. He'd stood in front of Napoleon Bonaparte at full strength, and he had not broken. The sepoy general had beaten the emperor. So there's the arc of the man Napoleon dismissed. In India, he reasoned his way across an impossible river and won the victory he treasured above all others. In Spain, he waited out a better-regarded enemy for weeks and then destroyed 40,000 men in 40 minutes the moment they gave him the chance. And in Belgium, he hid an entire army behind a hill and used it to break the greatest soldier of the age. 3 moves: reasoning, patience, and survival. Not one of them the work of the amateur Napoleon thought he was facing. So here's the question I asked you to hold on to. Which was the real masterpiece? The ford that shouldn't have existed at Assaye, the 40-minute annihilation at Salamanca, or the hidden line that broke Napoleon at Waterloo? I've got my pick, but I'd genuinely rather hear yours. So tell me in the comments, and tell me why. And if this made you see Wellington a little differently, do me a favor and send it to one person who thinks they already know the Waterloo story. There's always more to it than the ridge. Next time, we're going even further back, to the general who never lost a single battle in his entire life, and who most people have never even heard of. Subscribe so you don't miss him. See you again soon.